Alex, thanks so much for being here. So FC Barcelona is not only the richest team in soccer, it's the richest team in sports. Why is Messi leaving presenting an opportunity for them to sort of fix their balance sheet?
Well, because Barcelona is a fan-owned team, what it does is it dedicates all of its capital, the lion's share of its capital, towards the playing squad. If you're owned by a private investor, that's not necessarily the case. You want to take some profit out. So a good yardstick there is the Dallas Cowboys. They don't make as much revenue as Barcelona, but they make almost 10 times as much profit. There are structural reasons to do with the US which make it a little bit different. Now, Barcelona spends 110% of its revenue on player salaries alone. So getting rid of Messi, not only does that reduce his costs, he earns about 160 million euros a year, but he has an inflationary effect on the rest of the team. Everybody, the other players look at him and go, well, am I half as good as Messi? No, I'm probably 70% as good as Messi, so I should be earning 70% of his salary. And so taking him out of the scenario reduces the overall wage cap as well, because you can pay other players less.
Wow. And earlier this week, we were talking about the CVC, the private equity team that was, the private equity firm that was putting 10% stake in La Liga. Do you think this had anything to do with sort of what we're seeing now play out?
Well, you have seen the fact that, because these teams are fan-owned, it's harder for them to raise capital. When I say these teams, I mean Barcelona and Real Madrid, the two most successful teams in Spain. Their rivals on a European level, like Manchester City, Chelsea, and Paris Saint-Germain, they have massively wealthy owners who can put equity and debt into the team and fund them very well. These Spanish clubs, they can only raise debt because they're owned by the fans, and the fans are not going to sell any equity. That means you've got to be a little bit more creative. How are you going to monetize your assets? Well, they kind of are part of a joint venture, which is La Liga. That's the way these things are structured. La Liga is owned by its clubs. And so if you can find a way of selling a stake in La Liga, then maybe you can monetize a part of your asset without needing the fans' permission.
Got it. And so then what are the other teams that are sort of being floated to potentially sign Messi? I imagine there's not a lot of teams that can maybe afford a player like him.
Well, the huge advantage you have, of course, is that you are not having to pay a transfer fee. So you don't have to amortize those costs. That means you can afford to pay a little bit more in terms of salary. You'll be getting him on a free transfer. Nonetheless, that is going to be a big salary cost. The names that are being floated are the three I just mentioned: Chelsea, PSG, and Manchester City. They have basically natural resource wealth behind them. Each of their owners are billionaires who are willing to float the club's losses in order to, buy access to a different kind of, they've got a different sort of end game from the classic owner of a football team.
And Alex, it's interesting because you've been following this really closely. I'm curious sort of how you think this situation with Messi in Barcelona might impact the structure that maybe you mentioned Real Madrid and Barcelona. Do you think this could potentially have an effect on sort of how they structure their financial businesses in terms of, 100% fan-owned? I'm curious what you see sort of going forward for the clubs.
Well, the huge challenge they have is that in order to sell an equity stake, you have to have a plurality of fan votes. So basically 2/3 of the fans have to vote to sell an equity stake. I think the model they have in Germany, which is 50% plus one vote fan ownership, so it's controlled by the fans, is quite good. And 49% is then owned by private enterprise. In many cases. And now, it's really hard to achieve that because the fans are never going to agree to sell an equity stake. So even though the current management might say, well, we want Barcelona to be stable financially, the fans are always going to say, well, we want you to write blank checks for the best players in the world. That means you end up with incredibly fine profit margins. And if you come into a difficult place, such as the virus and the lockdowns, where you get a huge hit to revenue, then you don't have as much money set aside for a rainy day. So it's very hard to see how anything can really change for the likes of Real Madrid and Barcelona.
Right. And as you mentioned in your column, the pandemic has presented quite the rainy day for these clubs because they don't have fans coming into the stadiums. Quick Takes, Alex Webb, thanks so much.